Welcome to our podcast. My name is Monika Holland, and today I've got privilege to interview Natalie Earle, who is a certified nutritional therapy practitioner as well as a GAPS practitioner. She's based in Jacksonville in Oregon, in USA. And Natalie, you've been in a holistic field for more than 10 years now, and you've been helping many people to reverse their chronic diseases, anything from Hashimoto through PCOS, IBS, type 2 diabetes. But today I'm actually very excited to have a chat with you about hormonal health. I would love for you to introduce yourself to start with and tell us a little bit more about your personal healing story, obviously focusing on your hormonal health there, and tell us what actually led you to your current work, what led you to help people to start regaining their health.
Yes. Like most practitioners, I think we all have dealt with our own health issues at one point, but mine definitely straight out of a GAPS book story from childhood, had some health issues, and my health didn't really fully crumble though until I was in college. And there's have as I've told my story in many different ways on a lot of different podcasts because the more I learn in this field about nutrition and functional nutrition and functional medicine, I'm starting to link other things in my childhood and in my young adult life. One of the things that I connected just even around 2020 COVID times, because my body had a very visceral reaction to not wanting to get any kind of vaccination to protect myself from COVID. I realized that my symptoms really culminated in college right after I got the HPV vaccine. And that was a another needle or just kind of on the haystack that just like made my health start to crumble. Um, and what I was dealing with at the time was a lot of anxiety, a lot of skin issues. I had cystic acne, and it just completely destroyed my confidence. I was having a lot of digestive issues, chronic constipation. Around that time, I also developed a lot of chronic immune compromised symptoms, right? Like I had chronic UTIs and chronic bronchitis and multiple antibiotics frequently during my freshman year in college. And I also was trying to explore with health because I always had a feeling that nutrition would be a component. So I started to see a naturopath, but I chose personally to be vegetarian at the time, mostly for environmental reasons. And then it actually contributed to a lot of my digestive issues, a lot of my blood sugar imbalances, and I actually completely lost my period during college. I was amenorrhea. I had amenorrhea and was overexercising, pushing my body very hard, and my body was responding with this symptom of losing my cycle, losing my vitality, right? And I had around. Not only did I have amenorrhea, I also had irregular cycles. They would come, and when it did come back, it was excruciating pain. I remember dating my now husband, and he was on a date with me, and all of a sudden my cramps started to come on. And when it starts to happen like that, if you know what I'm talking about, when it's that bad, you just if you don't get the Advil, if you don't get some sort of painkiller early enough, then it can destroy you, completely ruin your day. So I was, just okay, Andy, take me to the CVS. Let's get me some Advil. But I was trying to play it cool too. So, because I was just dating him. And I remember having to go into the CVS pharmacy and just wrenching in pain. I was curled up in a ball on the ground in the CVS pharmacy trying to get the Advil, and the attendant had to come and help me just to help me check out because I was in so much pain. And then when I finally got the Advil again, it took so much time for it to kick in. And this was just one instance of many of these situations. And what's phenomenal is that I can now say that I do not have those period pains anymore after so many years of the rebuilding of my body and my hormonal system. But that was the peak. A lot of hormonal symptoms like cystic acne and terrible PMS and the menstrual pain, headaches around the cycle as well. And then fast forward a few years, and I started getting help. But I also my mother started was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. And it further has connected my understandings of hormonal health being very much tied to our brain health. And so now in my mission as a practitioner, I've integrated my view on hormones is comprehensive with, yes, we're going to work on with the hormones and rebuild your hormonal system, but it starts also with the central nervous system and the brain health. And I'd love to talk about that within each of the phases and get into that more. But I I have I have so much to gratitude for the work of Dr. Natasha Kimmel McBride and the functional medicine practitioners that I worked for and then learned from and did. I learned about functional testing and being able to actually take some snapshots of what the hormones look like. And that helped me a lot in guiding me on some missing links of detoxification and improving those hormonal system feedback loops.
Gosh, thank you for sharing that story because, it just so many young women are going through very similar issues that what you described. You've mentioned, that you took lots of antibiotics. Obviously, that basically took your microbiome out of whack.
Yes.
And as we know, and we'll talk about it a little bit later in more depth, if our microbiome is unbalanced, our hormonal system suffers. Then you've been vegetarian, so of course that is going to make the whole hormonal system even in a deeper, I would say,
Yes.
trouble, because of course hormones are made out of cholesterol, animal fats, and so on. So, lots of
Mhm.
vegan, vegetarians, sadly, they do have a lot of hormonal issues. Then you were kicking yourself with too much exercises. So probably your body was like pumping on cortisol, suppressing all your other sex hormones. So yeah, I can see so many people doing, experiencing the same, and I'm so
Yes.
pleased that you found Dr. Nasha Campbell McBride. You found you got this
Yes.
protocol, and you healed, and you do not have all of those issues anymore. So I'm really, really excited
Yeah.
to learn from your journey, from your expertise. So
Mhm.
but you've mentioned few symptoms. You've mentioned that you were in pain, that you had irregular period. And when I speak to my clients and members, or even with family members and female friends, there are so many like half truths or misconceptions, or maybe even myths about hormonal health.
Mm.
Um, one being, oh well, I've got my period is regular, so my hormones must be fine, or the one which which actually affected me as well. Well, yeah, I feel cramping, I am miserable, moody, sensitive, my back is hurting, and so were my friends, so were my family members. So we just make assumption that it's normal because this is
Mhm.
just a part of being a woman, right? Another myth, I don't know, just obviously people think that hormonal imbalances only affect women during menopause. Um, and I wanted to
Mhm.
ask you, because obviously you see many women at various kind of stages of their life.
Mhm.
What are kind of some of the biggest myths you encounter when you work with women's hormonal health?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say so there's 3 big myths that I wanna mention. The first is that, there's this popular idea recently that came out about seed cycling as one of the first things that you can do or should do to help regulate your hormones. If, there's it's well-titled book, it's really interesting, but in actuality the problem with seed cycling, so what seed cycling is that it talks about eating two different types of seeds during your follicular phase, during the first 2 weeks of your cycle, and then the second 2 weeks during the luteal phase to eat two different other seeds. And the problem that I have with this is not that, I mean, it's pretty benign, like you can do it, but I don't think it's the biggest bang for your buck that you can do if you're going to make one big shift in your lifestyle and diet. The seed cycling I don't think will help as much. And the reason for this is that one, it doesn't seem very ancestrally consistent. Seeds are definitely a food that ancestral humans would have eaten, but in the quantities and in the cycling that this methodology talks about, it's not ancestral. That we wouldn't have had flax seeds abundant and pumpkin seeds and then sunflower and there's also some issues with some of the omega content, and some people going into seed cycling already have too many omega 6s. And so when they're going and shifting into luteal phase, eating the sunflower seeds and sesame seeds, they're going to get still some more out of balance with their omega 6s and omega 3s. So I, instead of focusing on seeds, and the seeds do have protein in them, but they don't have bioavailable protein and not even surely enough. And the idea is to eat 1 tablespoon a day. It's not a lot of the seeds that you're eating. But if you're going to do the seed cycling, one, it's not taught to properly prepare the seeds. So you would want to soak and then sprout the seeds to unlock those nutrients. And then really the amount of protein that you're getting from it is not, and the amount of nutrients that are really going to make a difference on your hormones is not enough. I think the best thing we can actually do, so that instead of this being the best thing we can do for our hormones, I think the best thing we can do for our hormones is actually balance our blood sugar, and the best way to do that is to include more animal fats and proteins, like you were talking about. These are the building blocks for our hormones. All of our hormones are made of cholesterol and healthy fats, and these come from egg yolks, fish. It could be any other type of animal, and then lots of different types of fat, whatever fats that, ideally animal fats though, because these contain a lot of the fat soluble vitamins and cofactor minerals and things like that in their food, in that food group, right? So that's the first myth. The second
And
myth.
I would just, I just
Sure.
wanted to circle back. You've mentioned eating those seeds on a regular basis to
Mhm.
help imbalance hormones and so on. One
Mhm.
thing which screams to me is like in the current climate, not many people have a very sturdy microbiome. Not many people do not have leaky gut.
Right.
And so many people react to plant toxins and seeds.
Yes.
Seeds have so much oxalates and other plant toxins that if
Yeah.
somebody actually takes seriously that advice, maybe they even see improvement, maybe they even feel better to start with. And
Mm-hmm.
then that accumulation starts giving symptoms, maybe a year, maybe 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 10 years later. But they never
Exactly.
connected back to that high seed diet at the first place. So yeah, it is quite sometimes scary
Yeah.
what kind of nutritional interventions are recommended
Mm-hmm.
to help
Mm-hmm.
with our hormonal health. Yeah,
I
but you were
totally
saying, yeah,
agree. Well,
wait.
I totally agree on that second note with the because I did feel better going vegetarian at first, right? But the bioaccumulation that my body had with oxalates was huge, and that was a later piece of healing that I had to do. So I agree that we have to look at the recommendations that are out there and hold them up to an ancestral lens. That's how I teach my clients is okay, we're going to do this theoretical new type of treatment, but we're going to make sure that it's not theoretical, but like something like the ketogenic diet, which there are there are ancestral people groups that do eat high fat, but not necessarily quite uh, like the macronutrient profile that is recommended for a ketogenic diet. And there are different types of ketogenic macros even that you can make it very ancestral. And that's what we do. That's what I try to do, is to help people see, okay, let's put this up to an ancestral lens if we're going to use this protocol for particular reasons that are upheld with research. So holding the research, that nutritional research up to that lens can be very
Love that.
helpful for guiding anyone here. And yeah, so with that second myth is that that more hormones is better. Okay, so the more the better, right?
Right.
um, well, I want to use this myth to, so in a lot of cases, yes, we need more hormones sometimes. That's absolutely true. However, the important thing to know about hormones is that hormones work on a feedback loop. And this feedback loop is like a thermostat of, you want to turn the heat on. The more heat that there is in a system in the house, the heater's not going to turn on, right? So it's just like a thermostat. If we have a backlog of undetoxified, like there's three phases of detoxification of our hormones. Two are in the liver and one is through the gut. And so the gut is a major detox pathway that is regulated by the gut microbiome. And with many people, there is a recycling of more actually toxic forms of those hormones that are then going through phase 1 and phase 2 of liver detoxification. Those can get recycled into the body and signal to the body, hey, we actually have enough hormones. So that's why we get less, quote unquote, less hormones that the body is making. And so what I often find is that women will come to me on bioidentical hormone replacement because they have low hormones. But when we actually take a snapshot on their metabolic pathways, we can see that they're actually missing a couple links in their detox pathways. And if we correct that, then they don't need as much bioidentical hormones because their body can actually start making it. And the brain is in control. So I personally think so. In what I learned from my functional medicine days, is that, all hormones actually, the sensitivity to the hormone receptors on the cell and the actual hormone is actually much stronger sensitivity when we have a little less hormones circulating all around. It doesn't mean we want to like deprive our bodies of hormones, because hormones are very important. We want to make sure our brain is making those and making those signals to the ovaries and the gonads to make those hormones. But for example, insulin is a hormone, and it also has the same phenomenon of too much of it will make us insulin resistant. And then that hormone doesn't work as well, right? So that's the second myth.
And this is beautifully said, because I'm sure you remember when Dr. Natasha was explaining about functional deficiencies, that you might do blood test and you may see that your hormones are at whatever level. So it doesn't really
Mhm.
matter how much hormones you have. What matters, if those hormones your body produces, if they do what they need to do in the body. And when you mentioned about those detoxification pathways, if they're not functioning optimally, possibly we may have all these microplastics, xenoestrogens taking place of
Absolutely.
real hormone receptors. And although our blood work looks amazing, looks perfect, looks normal, we're not going to do anything with that hormones because all those, estrogens are taking the spots in those receptors. So obviously,
Absolutely.
hormonal health is not just hormones, as you've mentioned, it's detox, but also minerals, because all of it is working beautifully together
Mhm.
to to make sure that our body is functioning effectively. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And the third myth is that fasting is bad for women. That is not also ancestrally consistent. Ancestral people groups would go through phases and times of not eating, and that would not ruin our ancestral people groups the women's hormones in those groups. And we know this because we can actually go to visit tribes now who are practicing their ancestral lifestyles, and women do not have PMS. They do not have endometriosis, PCOS. They do not have fibroids or breast cancer. They do not have these issues. And so fasting is, as we talked about, the clearance of and detoxification. Fasting is when actually practiced properly from a calm, centered, loving place, right? Because there's so much that women are up against in our modern world about body image and using fasting as a kind of a punishment, really. And I don't believe that that's the way it should be. But I can speak from my own experience of dealing with bouts of anorexia and restricting my eating before doing gaps, that it was a control issue for me. And psychologically, it was a way for me um, to have, I kind of grasp onto control. But it was also fed by this. I started to like the way I looked after I would starve myself, basically. And that was also later I learned from Dr. Natasha's book, a microbiome imbalance there too, nutrient imbalances. So I know what it's like to restrict calories from that place. And now I never thought, as I started to heal and started learning about nutrition and learning the benefits of fasting, for many years I didn't think that I would ever be able to fast. And after many years of nourishing myself, I didn't jump into fasting right away. It was many years of healing. And then I was able to actually partake in fasting. And that was one of the best steps for getting more resolution with my hormones and more resolution with my blood sugar regulation. I was dealing with a lot of hypoglycemia still, even while on GAPS. And after starting to do some more fasting and doing more higher fat, ketogenic style, I was able to resolve that issue and shift my metabolism. So that the fact that fasting is saying that women are going to crash their hormones and um, it can be done excessively. And so this is why I do think that knowing about the different hormone cycle when you're cycling, when you are menstruating, in your menstruation years, you can know when the best time to fast is, and you can be more strategic about it and utilize it because fasting has huge benefits to insulin resistance, which is a root cause of PCOS and endometriosis and so many other issues. Breast cancer can be really antagonized by insulin resistance and too much sugar in the body. And then HPA axis dysregulation. So that's the stress response system that our body is going through all the time. And when we fast, we can actually calm the central nervous system and it actually resets our melatonin and our gut regularity. And it actually increases our microbiome diversity at times too. So more diverse bacteria can happen, can develop in those periods that we're fasting overnight. That a little bit longer. So I usually will tell people just make sure at first that you're just doing at least 12 hours of fasting overnight. When I look back in college years, like that wasn't happening for me. Like I was midnight snacking, things like that. It's very common. Or, you're out with friends and you have a late night meal or something like that. So just making sure cleaning that first step up of getting at least 12 hours of overnight fasting and not eating late into the night and having at least 3 hours before bedtime, not eating before 3 hours is phenomenal to help with this issue. And that's maybe all you need to do.
I agree. I think if I eat later than 6 p.m. and I typically go to bed 10 p.m.,
Mhm.
my sleep is disturbed and
Yes.
I do not wake up very well rested. But also, I think you are a walking example that any modality, well, in this case, you've mentioned fasting, but any modality, let's name a few, maybe cold exposure, cold therapy, red light therapy, or whatever it is, it's always dose dependent. There is always the right time and the right dose and the right amount of that modality. Because if you start doing some, I don't know, crazy protocols that you have to have prolonged fast for a few days or even just a water fast, and if your body is not ready for it, you're going to make your body even sicker than it is now. So yeah, I do. I'm a firm believer that it's so bio-individual, that you could make things much better if you work with your body and you know that your body is ready for instance, fasting. But you
Mhm.
could also harm your body if you just jump into, I don't know, another hype where people promote some modality based on, I
Mhm.
don't know, best published book or you know or some
Mhm.
nutritional guru influencer on Instagram. So yeah, so
Yes.
yeah, so
Yes.
I think it's important. I'm sure you're working with all your clients and you assess their health and you recommend maybe that you are not ready for fasting yet, but maybe you
Yeah.
can start with baby steps.
Yes, I hardly bring it up at the beginning at all.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
definitely a modality we use later on if needed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
Mhm.
obviously, you know, from what we were chatting so far, obviously hormonal imbalances, you know, do not affect only women during menopause. They can affect any women, actually any men, but mostly today we will be talking about women and even babies can be affected. I mean, toddlers, kids, teenagers, pretty much everyone. And you've mentioned about your mom and her onset of Alzheimer in her later days. So everyone can be affected. So when we move, obviously, through that whole lifetime, we can develop hormonal imbalances at any point. So I just wanted to, you know, get your a little bit your expertise and I want to help people understand what is actually normal and what is common but not normal on that lifetime hormonal journey. So
Mhm.
let's start from the very beginning. Let's start from the babies. Do actually babies and toddlers suffer from any hormonal imbalances? And if they do, how would a parent know?
Mm, mhm. So the absolutely babies and toddlers can suffer from hormonal imbalances, but it's from a functional perspective, we look at hormones as a symptom that's the body's trying to communicate that something else is wrong. Typically with toddlers, the younger the child or individual, it's definitely more clear to see that there's more of a root cause to the hormonal symptoms. Typically, that is blood sugar regulation. It can be stress, it can be nervous system dysregulation, it can be gut health. And it can be environmental inputs, so exposure to toxins impacting the child. And a lot of for babies and toddlers, there's so much importance actually when I work with women. We'll get to the pregnancy point, but before they're even born, there's so much you can do to set your baby up for balanced blood sugar. I know gestational diabetes is rampant, and this actually sets the stage for diabetes to be diagnosed in a child much earlier in life, and also methylation issues. So, extra B12, extra B9 or folate. Um, and B2, riboflavin, these different nutrients and many more nutrients that are methyl donors help this detox pathway that is very important for hormonal detoxification. And when mothers, they've done studies, and when mothers have extra of these nutrients during pregnancy, this improves the DNA and genetics of the baby and toddler for the rest of their life. They are less at risk for other more autoimmune conditions or diabetes, blood sugar regulation issues. So the symptoms that often will present that show that are a hormonal issue for babies and toddlers, because the most common hormones that are really prevalent for this age group are growth hormone and thyroid. Also, oxytocin is really important for immune health and connection and empathy building for the child, and brain development, right? We're focused on, like I mentioned earlier, the comprehensive understanding of our hormones is really making sure our brain is super healthy, because all of these hormones are like a symphony. And if we have the director, which is our brain, our pituitary and hypothalamus, if they are functioning really well, then the symphony can be very beautiful and harmonious. However, when we don't have that brain connection to the body, and there's clutter, then it sounds really chaotic. And that's what we see when we see babies and toddlers with skin issues, when we see eczema, a lot of rashes, maybe fussiness and colic, digestive issues, poor sleep, frequent waking, difficulty calming. And then the big things that really your doctor will very much be tracking is growth, concerns if the child is growing too quickly or too delayed, and milestones, right? So your doctors typically will be really cautious of all of the really important big things. But the symptoms that I just described are, you would never think that those are hormone related. And they are, but how we would really help a baby and a toddler is supporting their microbiome and making sure they're getting the whole food nutrition that they need to be building their hormones, and also cleaning up the environment, making sure there's no plastics in their environment. There's not a lot of perfumes or fragrances, which often are proestrogenic, and then so the environment we want to clean up. We want to, going back to the diet, we want to make sure that mom's blood sugar is really regulated. And when she's breastfeeding, if mom's blood sugar is not regulated, then that's going to be sending signals to the baby to dysregulate their blood sugar. So if you have a baby and toddler that grows very stable blood sugar levels, are, lots of fat and proteins for the building blocks, and then the minerals are in the diet for the mother and then passed on, then that's going to set them up for a lifetime of more balanced and regulated hormones, especially when they get into puberty.
And I think this is such a important investment into a child, right? Because what is the best reward or return from that investment is having a healthy adult who can be self-sufficient, happy, joyful, and succeeding in life, whatever that success may look like. But you've mentioned that obviously foods are very, very important in the context of hormonal health, that the mother who is breastfeeding, she should be focusing on the correct foods. So in terms of the baby who starts, obviously the mother starts introducing some solid food into that baby's diet, what sort of foods would you recommend to support that early hormone development at that point?
Oh, first would be either liver or butter. Those two foods are tend to be ancestrally consistent too. Many of the indigenous tribes will feed their first foods are going to be butter or fat, and then also the organs like liver. And the liver is a superfood. I think it is the biggest superfood on the planet. And it's one of the four cornerstones of gut healing foods that I teach a lot of my clients. And the babies love it, actually. So it will help them. It provides a lot of the minerals. It's like the multivitamin out there too, that if you want to give your baby multivitamins, you're going to do liver.
Definitely.
So yes, and the butter as well. It's always, I mean, I just think of all those baby videos out there of the first time you give a baby butter or bacon or something like very fatty, and they're just so in love with it. They just can't get enough of it. These foods are really nourishing to stabilize the blood sugar levels. They provide immune benefits to the baby, and especially because there is a hormone and there's a brain hormone and immune connection. These hormones are actually very important for our immune system. So there's a lot of other um, I think those two foods are the highest on the docket there for reintroducing or for first foods. And then also meat stock is a really great one, especially um, just with the amino acids in a digestible form. And we are up against a lot in our society. I think that leaky gut is very rampant, and a lot of mothers will require this food. And so whatever's mom's eating, baby can have too. The meat stock especially. And then fermented foods would be like the next thing. So the first would be fats or organ, the liver, gelatinous meats, and then meat stock, and then fermented foods like some kefir or yogurt can be actually introduced very early.
And for all the mothers listening to our podcast, and if your baby is on commercial formula, please do go to Western A Price Foundation, or even other sources, just to find DIY real formula recipes, including
Yeah.
meat stock and other natural foods, because formula obviously is not the right food for the babies. Um,
Yeah.
and as
Yes,
well,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah, on that note, I think it's really more about what you're not giving the baby at the beginning. That's very important here. We do not want to be giving the baby seed oils, which are that's probably one of the first ingredients in this,
Yeah.
and unfortunately in the formulas that are more popular. And then also, we don't want to be giving our the babies before they have molars the grains, because that's going to be very hard on the digestive system. Once they start to get more teeth, they can get you they that's something that they can start to try. But it's very important to have the soft, easy to digest and very high fats and high mineral foods in the diet at that stage. And so it's what's not in there is Cheerios. You're not doing Cheerios.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think
We're not.
yeah, if it's got a barcode on it, don't give it to your child or baby
Yes.
or even yourself.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, and you can do fruits and vegetables, cooked vegetables, of course, and to start with, and then you can cook it in meat stock to help with the digestibility of those fibers for the vegetables for the baby.
So now we have a healthy baby because the baby is
Yeah.
on a breast milk. Then we've got a healthy toddler because the healthy toddler is eating all these beautiful foods you mentioned. And now we kind of, moving into later stages, into teenage years.
Mhm.
Obviously, I'm sure you probably maybe not concerned, but you are aware about a lot of early puberty trends in kids. I'm seeing
Mhm.
girls developing breast as early as 7 years old, or you've got girls
Yeah.
getting their period before they turn 10 years old.
Yeah.
But also, very worrying increase in gender dysphoria and body image distress and so on. I kind of like feel that
Mhm.
so many kids and teenage bodies are, how would I say it, accelerating through, something that's meant to be happening very slowly, very gradually, and later. And of course, we are seeing a long-term impacts of those things, not only
Mhm.
physically, but also emotionally and socially. You have a teenager with lack of confidence. You have teenager who don't know how to have a relationship with peers, with parents, with friends, and
Mhm.
obviously many young women and men being affected by not being fertile. So so
Yes.
while it's becoming all very, very common, that doesn't mean that it's normal. And obviously we
Right.
need to ask, why is it happening? Like,
Mhm.
how do you feel about all these early puberty trends, and what do you think is causing them?
Yes, it's very concerning for the early puberty because ancestral people groups and indigenous tribes, the average puberty for females starts their menstruation starts around 17. So it's like 10 years earlier that you're describing that some women or young girls are starting to get their their periods. And this has it's concerning primarily because we know so much about the toxins that are in our environment and the implications to those, not just from a hormonal standpoint, where kids are actually, it's we know that these plastics and pesticides, fragrances, personal care products, cleaning products, non organic food, all of those things are contributing to estrogen in the body and hijacking the hormonal signaling. So we know that that is a contributor. But it doesn't just cause uh, early puberty for individuals. It actually sets the stage for cancer, I believe, because it's so much earlier that these girls are starting to menstruate and starting the hormonal cycle, and it's not stimulated from a biological, it's stimulated from external. And so that can be more carcinogenic when we have external, too much of hormones, right, can be problematic. And so I think that the earlier women are starting to cycle and from exogenous ways, that's contributing to more growth, more cell
Mhm.
division, and more imbalances with regards to checks and balances within our body that would keep cancer at bay. Um, the I think it's also caused by the blood sugar regulation issues that are rampant in our society. I mean, diabetes is hugely prevalent and is becoming more and more prevalent in young kids. I mentioned the gestational diabetes setting the stage, and so this can be a factor as well why there is earlier puberty happening. And the reason why this is so important is because, and why blood sugar is really a foundational treatment to try to, or kind of focus for nutrition, is to stabilize your blood sugar to in order to influence sex hormones is because insulin and leptin influence those sex hormone production, and cortisol also can steal away. So the huge spikes in your blood sugar will raise cortisol, and that steals the necessary building blocks to make sex hormones, and it makes cortisol, it's an emergency state to balance your blood sugar. So all your hormones want you to do when you start going through puberty, their focus is to get you pregnant so that you can reproduce. And if you are in an emergency state your whole life, your whole childhood of emergency blood sugar regulation roller coaster, your body, when it gets to the time of puberty where your body's starting to say, oh, let's reproduce, it's not going to be focused on balance with that, with actually being able to do that successfully even. It's really and in a lot of ways you could see this early puberty as a bit of the body's last ditch effort to reproduce before vitality ends, because hormones they are a vitality sign, right? Like if you are able to, if you're healthy enough to reproduce, your hormones are going to be more balanced, and it's going to work a little bit better. um, yeah, I don't want to be misunderstood that something is really wrong with you if you have hormone imbalances. It's really as much as or as simple as there's just key components in your body that it's missing for it to be balanced. It's not necessarily wrong. It's a very normal, healthy response that your body's going through because we're up against so much in our modern world with a lot of grains and sugar, processed carbs, refined seed oils. All of these hijack our blood sugar and insulin, and then on top of that, the toxins too, right? So I also see a lot of nutrient depletion in young teens, right? They're not getting the proper food absorption because of microbiome imbalances, because maybe they had antibiotics at some point in, strep infection or tonsils removed, something like that. Or maybe even when they were born, there were antibiotics present. So the absorption of certain nutrients can really impact the balance of the hormones, and that might be also leading to the early puberty as well. And then just in general, that heightened state of stress, going back to the brain being in control of this beautiful harmony and symphony. If we are not instilling in our kids and in our young teens about a way of life that can be sustainable, that's calm and centered, and yeah, it can be exciting, and there's so much drawing our attention. But if we can't instill in them a sacred place for them to go to regenerate and restore, there's going to be chronic stress in their life, and that is also going to contribute to a lot of the hormonal disruption and symptoms, not to mention the early puberty as well.
So what would you say to, so let's say parents of teenage, of whether it's a girl or boy,
Hmm.
who are going through hormonal issues? What are beyond, let's say, early puberty
Mm.
symptoms, beyond maybe acne or maybe mood swings? Is there anything else what parents should be more maybe observant about, and thinking, okay, I need to perhaps support my child more in the context of the right foods and the right environment? What kind of
Yeah.
signs would you tell
Mm.
parents to look for?
Yeah, so outside of PMS and acne and mood swings, I think beyond that, there's real serious mental health symptoms that are presenting during puberty. And interestingly, on our podcast, the Healing with Confidence podcast, we interviewed a Dr. Tiffany Brownbush, and she's a functional neurologist and neuropsychologist. And she was talking about how during puberty, the what's really happening is crazy remodeling of the brain for our young men and young women. And during that time, a lot of mental health symptoms can be exacerbated. Things like anxiety, depression, ADHD, um, irritability, those are those mood swings. We just classify it as puberty, but it's something very serious. And what's, what's, it's not, unfortunately, the, during that time, because it's so serious, it's actually becoming more heightened. And it's a lot of teenagers are going on medications to resolve these issues, right? They're going on Adderall or, different kinds of maybe birth control. Maybe they're going on these different medications to help with their irregular cycle or the menstrual pains or acne, right? But with regards to what's happening with the remodeling from the changes of hormones and how that's impacting the brain, it's very important what goes in the brain and in the body during this time. And it can set the stage for later years of a dependency for those things that we're putting in. So if a teenager is going through a junk food phase and just eating tons of sugar, and that's actually an ingredient of hijacking the dopamine levels in their brain, that's going to set the stage for a dependency on that type of neurostimulator later in life. And so this is how easy it is to get hooked. And we learned from Dr. Tiffany Brownbush, she encourages her teens to actually really postpone as much as possible any kind of substances like alcohol, drugs, and really to be cognizant of what's coming in during that time. And sometimes what's just needed are more nutrients, right? More B vitamins, more fats, more protein, because a lot of women and young women especially are encouraged to not eat protein, and so they're not eating animal protein at all, so they need to really focus on making sure they're getting that in. The remodeling can happen for women. It starts at puberty and then it goes all the way to age 25. So if someone does start early, it's going to take a long time for that remodeling to continue to happen. So if you can abstain, that's optimal, but at least limit those inputs because that's going to protect your brain for later on. And so those are the things that I think parents can look out for, is that mental health risk is that, they're the common go-to is going to be to take a medication. But unfortunately, this is just a symptom of the body trying to regulate amidst, like we talked about, the blood sugar imbalances and the toxins that the body is up against. So it's just going to need more support, some more nutrients. And if you can look for those first before other kinds of therapies, conventional therapies, that would be my first recommendation, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sadly these days the mood swings and those mental behaviors are being kind of brushed under the carpet, under the slogan, oh well, they are just teenagers, they just moody teenagers, and it's so common that everyone starts accepting it and not
Mhm.
reading it as a signal from the body, hey, I want to regulate, support me with the right food, with the right lifestyle, with the right clothing, with the
Yes.
right exposure to the sun, and so on and so on. But
Yeah.
obviously, you've mentioned that many solutions these days is getting that teenage girl on a pill. to regulate her
Mm.
cycle, to put
Mhm.
a medication. And there's always a price to be paid for those solutions because, as we both know, those solutions, they suppress. So
Yes.
on the surface, it seems, well, it is working because suddenly my period is very regular. Suddenly I'm not moody. So, hey, it is working. But we
Mm.
know that inside the body, it's like a ticking bomb. So, what are actually health risks in terms of taking the pill to, for instance, regulate the
Mhm.
cycle?
Right. Right. Because I laugh because puberty is it's like the body is like kind of sputtering, right? So a lot of young teens are having irregular cycles, and that's just normal. The body's just trying to figure it out. During that time, that transition is, the ovaries are just now starting to produce a lot of these hormones like estrogen and progesterone. And so from a functional and ancestral nutrition perspective, we need to allow space and time for that process for the body to learn, really, because it has to go through that feedback loop. But what happens is when they're taking the pill to regulate, quote unquote, it's very misleading. It's not actually regulating the menstrual cycle at all. It's actually shutting it down completely and replacing it with a withdrawal bleed. So it's absolutely just hijacking your hormonal rhythm and stifling it. So, the problems with this is not to mention the fact that it's a medication and that there are nutrient depletions that are known from the pill. So you can start to, over the longer you're on the pill, you can become very B6, B12, and folate deficient. You can become magnesium, zinc, and selenium deficient. This sets the stage for Hashimoto's or thyroid issues later in life. And then it's well known that this medication actually completely changes the gut microbiome as well. So you can get leaky gut, you can get more food sensitivities, you can get autoimmunity, and the inflammation that ensues from that leads to a lot more symptoms. And they also know that there's cardiovascular risks from the birth control. The hormones like estrogen are really important for our circulatory system. So it helps with the blood flow and it helps with regenerating our cells. There's a lot of higher risks of depression, anxiety, other mood disorders, and it just is masking. The big idea here is that it's completely masking. It's a band-aid, and it's completely burying actually the true issues that might be problematic, like PCOS, thyroid disorders, gut dysbiosis, the estrogen dominance issue, which comes from toxins and environmental toxins and lack of detoxification of estrogen leads to that estrogen dominance. And so if we don't allow for our young teens to figure that their bodies out, I think this is the biggest disservice that we have to young women is not teaching them what does a cycle actually look like? What does a healthy cycle actually look like? I was never taught that in my teens. I had to go to school to learn. And I'd love to, yeah, like we can get into that right now of just the beautiful ups and downs of a cycle of from the benefits that you get from estrogen and the benefits you get from progesterone and the importance of both of those. And then you can actually, if you're using birth control for its actual purpose, which is to prevent pregnancy, that is your choice, right? I do believe that it's a wonderful choice that women can choose. However, you should know the risks, all of these risks that I just mentioned, and more probably. There's suppressed ovulation for long term can actually lead to brain function issues, bone density issues, metabolic issues, some infertility later in life, and it impacts your your stress response system. So your resilience to life, right? Uh, yeah.
That's a very high price to pay for taking
Mm.
the pill. You're absolutely right that when I was growing up, when I had menstruation, I was also not educated about what that period looks like. Luckily, I had an older sister, so I was
Mm.
kind of, learning by proxy. But my mom
Yes.
told me a funny story. When she had her first menstruation, her first period, she thought she was dying because she didn't understand what's going on. She saw
Yes.
blood. She went to bed. She covered herself and she was preparing herself for death.
Oh,
And, and,
that's
and
so
then,
sweet.
and then is this,
Oh.
one of those stories, funny, not funny, a story. And then my grandma came and she saw her daughter, which was my mom, lying in bed, crying, praying. And she's like,
Oh
"What are
my
you
God.
doing?" She's like, "I am dying." And obviously, my grandma ended up punishing my mom for, for being so silly. But
That is so
how would she know, right? So I
no.
think we have a very big responsibility in educating
Yes.
um, parents. Parents have a big responsibility in educating the teenage girls on
Hmm.
how that what is that menstrual cycle, how a healthy period looks like, what she
Yes.
may feel, what she may even smell, how would
Yes.
that look like in her underwear, right? because
Hmm.
because it can be
Hmm.
messy, so the parent has to prepare that child, that teenager, to step into that phase. But obviously I want us to set that record straight about the menstrual cycle, but I'm very
Hmm.
cautious about our time, and I think this is a
Hmm.
good time to finish part one of our conversation, and we'll circle back to that very question where we're going to be talking about how that healthy menstrual cycle looks like, and then we'll go for the rest of the lifetime, from the young women, from through pregnancy, and so on, in episode 2. Natalie, thank
Hmm.
you so much for such an insightful conversation, and I really look forward to connect with you again for part 2.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much, Monica.